The archetype of the wife and the mistress has existed since the dawn of human civilization, albeit in different forms. The consort and the paramour, the queen and the concubine. The English language even abundantly accommodates the concept. The mistress is prevalent everywhere, changing shape based on her society and culture, falling under different labels and being subject to varying levels of societal acceptance. But what is it that distinguishes her from the wife? And is there a universal pattern that separates the two? Do the concubines of medieval Europe share similar characteristics with the mistresses of a modern 21st century man? Is there a universal criterion that denotes a virtuous wife, features that men unanimously search for? And on the other side of the coin, what criteria define the mistress? In other words, what denigrates her to that role? A supplementary woman rather than the main dish? Is there an invisible string that connects the wife of a modern president to, say, the wife of an emperor from ancient Rome? Using ample historical and fictional examples, aided by biological and psychological analysis, I hope to uncover what lies at the heart of the paradigm of the wife and the mistress, why it has existed for so long, and why such a system continues to prevail. To understand this pattern of behavior on a cultural and societal level, we must first understand it on a biological level. And many researchers in the field of evolutionary biology have observed a phenomenon that explains a lot of the choices men, both ancient and modern, make when choosing a mate. It comes down to the fact that men expend comparatively little energy during sexual reproduction, which means that their options are wider in regards to how they can approach involvement with their offspring. The low investment mating strategy for men is when a man attempts to secure the maximum amount of sexual partners, allowing for a rich variety in genetic composition in his offspring, and a high likelihood of survival in high infant mortality environments, which was precisely what humans have had to face for all of our history until very recent scientific advancements. As Daniel J. Kruger succinctly puts it, men consistently show a marked desire for sexual variety. The fitness advantage of short-term sexual relationships to men is obvious. The number of potential offspring men can have increases linearly with the number of sexual partners. This advantage is the reason why short-term mating without parental investment is the strategy that most male mammals pursue. In evolutionary biology, this type of mating strategy is often referred to as that of the cad. High investment in sexual partners, but low investment in offspring. The opposite of this is the dad, which puts less investment into securing sexual partners and will instead invest a lot more into his offspring. Considerable evidence suggests that unlike most mammals, humans are designed for long-term sexual relationships with substantial male parental investment in children. The mating strategy that is ideal varies greatly depending on species and circumstances, and another factor that strongly influences this is that of sexual dimorphism, or in other words, the physical differences between the male and female in a given species. The greater the dimorphism, the more polygamous a species is, with certain animals like elephant seals often having over 50 females reproducing with a single male. This is thought to be because of the increased strength and aggressiveness of the males, which creates a ruthless hierarchical system with fierce sexual competition, where very few males can successfully reproduce. A reality that every polygamous system faces. On the other hand, animals with much less sexual dimorphism have been shown to have high investment mating strategies, a prominent example being penguins. Certain species might even be considered monogamous by human standards. So, how sexually dimorphic are humans? On average, men and women differ 15% in body mass, and because of this increased mass and larger size, men are substantially stronger, typically having around 60% more upper body strength and 30% more lower body strength, which doesn't put us at the dimorphism of elephant seals, but that also doesn't mean that we're strictly biologically monogamous. The truth is that humans have practiced both monogamy and polygamy historically, and have often employed both for good reason, both biologically and culturally, which we will go into later. The preferable dating strategy, again, likely depends on the circumstances. The more primal human males had reason to pursue short-term strategies because of high infant mortality, and paternal investment seemingly being of little importance, as well as, of course, it just being easier for the male. But in the modern world, neither of these statements can be considered correct, as infant mortality is at an all-time low, and we have also come to understand the integral role of the father in the healthy development of children. As Kruger explains, human infants require considerable parental care, and children reared in father-absent households suffer much higher mortality rates than those reared in father-present households. This can explain the reason why much of society still very much functions on the idea of the monogamous relationship, be it through the belief in the institution of marriage or because of cultural and religious reasons. Although monogamy seems to have always been the preferred system in civilized human society, there has always been a noticeable presence of polygamy in all time periods, but especially in modernity, and especially for the higher class of men. But why is this? To understand the societal prevalence of this phenomenon, we have to first take a look at its historical roots. Marriage, and likewise monogamy, when it first came about in human civilization, was predicated on economics and politics, especially the higher up you went in society. It was by and large a contract between two families and would serve mainly as a means for fiscal gain. To look at the unions of the higher members of society, we notice throughout history that there's been a system of marriage wherein a commitment is made by a man to a single woman. This is in line with the high investment dad mating strategy we mentioned before, and yet there's a glaring caveat to this. Although almost all rulers, be they kings, sultans or emperors, do marry and remain married to one woman, it is virtually non-existent for rulers to remain sexually exclusive to said woman. And there are often abundant systems in place to accommodate for these extramarital affairs. The concubine is an ideal historical parallel to the modern mistress. Concubines were recognized by the king, and even his wife would be aware of them, and would serve as not only companions to the king, but also as possible rearers of his children. And while the king would acknowledge these children and expend some effort on them, his priorities always lay with his legitimate family. The concubinage system de facto took care of the king's need for sexual variety, while also actually helping the lineage by increasing the number of viable heirs. It has great benefits due to it allowing many children to be born to a powerful father, thus proliferating his strong genetics and wealth, which not only brings prosperity to the lineage, but often to the whole kingdom. The unique aspect of this system is that it combines parts of both high and low investment mating, which brings up the question that if the king is the highest power in the country and he follows this system, is that because it is the ideal and most preferable one for human men? Naturally, when we talk about kings and their relationships, we exclude a vast majority of relationship dynamics, both historical and modern, because most people aren't in the position of a king. Our modern romantic ideal of the marital union likely stems in Christian values, which have long influenced Western society. Words like, "A man shall leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh," Genesis 2:24, from the Bible allude to a higher, a more spiritual union between man and woman that requires lifetime loyalty from both parties to be achieved. And this notion of becoming one is precisely where much of our understanding of love comes from. The spiritual aspect of love and marriage is certainly one of much note, but it would be foolish to not examine a very prominent and relevant factor in regards to the biblical view of marriage, and that is of scarcity. In The Genealogy of Morals, philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche introduces us to the idea of the slave morality. He proposes the idea that much of Christian thought and behavior stems from self-resentment that demonizes actions of the powerful and idealizes actions of the weak or the slave. Matthew 19, verses 23 to 26, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God, illustrate a clear hostility towards the wealthy. And Nietzsche makes the point that such a way of thinking discourages man from striving for greatness. In a similar vein, do we interpret Christianity's insistence on monogamy as a striving for spiritual wealth, or is it merely a result of their material poverty? Because poor men, whom comprise the majority of early Christian followers, as Nietzsche explained, wouldn't have the means to support more than one woman even if they wanted to. So, is the reason Christianity demonizes polygamy adjacent to why they demonize wealth, simply because they can't have it? Though this line of thinking bears some fruit, it also can't be denied the social stability that Christianity promotes with monogamy. It's clear that any form of polygamy and short-term mating leaves many male parties dissatisfied, as they are left without a mate. Short-term mating has never been something practiced by all men. No, it is reserved for a select few at the top of the sexual hierarchy. So, to have a society founded on Christian values of marriage is pivotal to its success, as it means that every man has an opportunity to have a wife and family, which allows for prosperity, both on a societal and individual level. As all countries need middle-class men to survive, and you can't expect them to work for you and even die for you if they're not getting a basic psychological and spiritual need met. A religion that attempts, much like the concubinage system of old, to create a healthy outlet for man's need for sexual variety is Islam. Islam acknowledges the importance of monogamy, but also understands the biological and societal benefits of successful and powerful men reproducing more. So, Islam allows its followers up to 4 wives. This isn't really meant to be short-term mating at all, as all 4 wives and their offspring are meant to be treated equally, but it's a sort of hybrid system that attempts to give powerful men a virtuous outlet while also promoting monogamy. As of course, de facto, most married Muslim men are in monogamous marriages, which helps maintain societal stability. The strong family unit is instrumental to societal success, and it's why all successful religions and cultures held it at the forefront of their value system. Pure monogamy is undoubtedly favorable to pure polygamy, as they are much analogous to long and short-term mating respectively. And as we previously concluded, short-term mating en masse is not desirable, as it prevents proper investment in offspring, as well as being simply unsustainable. For the family to prosper, only monogamy with a minor implementation of polygamy, be it through concubinage or multiple wives, has been permitted, as it cannot exist under other circumstances. The only religions that have practiced polygamy have been cults, and they have been subject to much disgust and disdain from the layman. These cults don't survive because their philosophy does not create life. As the Bible puts it, to be carnally minded is death. In Man and His Symbols, psychologist Carl Jung's last book before his death, one of his colleagues, Jacobi, introduces us to a young man named Henry, who is one of our patients, and explains his conflicting feelings regarding his fiancée. The man who fears the communications of his inner depths, like Henry, is as much afraid of the feminine element in himself as he is of real women. At one moment, he is fascinated by her. At another, he tries to escape. Fascinated and terrified, he flees so as not to become her prey. He dare not approach a beloved and therefore idealized partner with his animal-like sexuality. As a typical result of his mother tie, Henry had difficulty in giving both feeling and sensuality to the same woman. Jacobi's assertion of Henry is that he cannot love and desire the same woman because he has a split perception of women, dividing them into either idealized and untouchable virgins or into debased and low whores. Jacobi concludes that this stems from Henry's unresolved Oedipus complex, in layman's terms, that he wanted to sleep with his mother. Because of this repressed desire, Henry pedestalized his mother and instinctively from a young age viewed love and motherhood as separate from desire and passion, which created this duality in his perception of women, where such men love they have no desire, and where they desire, they cannot love. Sigmund Freud. The division seen in the Madonna Hall complex is exactly akin to that seen between wives and mistresses, because one is seen as a loving and maternal figure that cares for her young, while the other is a sensual and passionate woman that is for carnal desire but can never be worthy of respect. It is this psychological complex that is the basis of the phenomenon of the wife and the mistress that we can observe in so many men, both historical and fictional. In Steve Jobs' eponymous biography, written by journalist author Isaacson, we are given a profoundly intimate look into Jobs' romantic life, from his first relationship with his high school girlfriend to his marriage with his wife in his mid-30s. And it's exactly these two relationships that we can examine to understand his view of women, and also the collective male consensus around women and their various archetypes. To understand Steve Jobs' first relationship with Qu'ran Brennan, we must understand Jobs as a personality, as well as the cultural landscape he grew up in. During the 1960s, Western, but especially American society, saw a large-scale shift in its culture. First influenced by beatnik authors like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, whose works extensively criticized cultural norms at the time, favoring Eastern religions, free love, and anti-war ideas, the counterculture was then catapulted by musical acts like the Beatles and Bob Dylan, who rejected pre-World War II values in favor of life-affirming and hedonistic pursuits, a concoction of sex and drugs that also coincided with the sexual revolution that was just taking off at the time. Jobs lived through this complex time period. He was a teenager at the tail end of the 60s, so it influenced him greatly. Jobs even went on a spiritual trip to India that inspired much of the philosophy and vision that would bring him success later in life. He met Qu'ran, his first girlfriend, in high school, and this relationship continued on and off for several years. It was in 1977, when Qu'ran found out that she was pregnant, that their relationship would change drastically. Being in similar hippie circles, Jobs had reason to believe that he might not be the father of the child, as he thought Qu'ran had been involved with other men around the same time, which was something that Qu'ran would even later confirm. Jobs also spread a rumor that he was infertile, so the child being his was simply not possible. For the following decades, Jobs would vehemently deny his paternity, despite a DNA test that confirmed that he was in fact the father. Jobs' case brings us on to another interesting topic that we have yet to discuss, that of paternity certainty. Jobs was dead set on not investing resources, be they energy, time, or money, into Qu'ran and her daughter. He didn't want to be an active father because, in part, he didn't view Qu'ran as someone who would be a good mother. And this ties into paternity certainty, as precisely because Jobs had reason to believe he wasn't the father, he had reason to not invest into a child that might not be his. For Jobs, Qu'ran had delegated herself to a lower class of women that was not suitable to be the mother of his child. And we can infer this because Jobs wasn't simply a character that didn't take paternity seriously, only fixated on short-term dating, like how many high-status celebrities are now. Because in 1991, he did get married to the educated and classy Laureen Powell. Steve clearly saw in Laureen something that wasn't present in Qu'ran. Laureen was serious and intelligent. She was of a higher class, and she was a woman that Steve could respect. Respect being a fundamental pillar of marriage, it's no wonder that Steve was married to Laureen for over 20 years, until his death. While Qu'ran never got a diamond ring or a loving husband, only a child without the support and care of its father. Don Draper is a man who has everything. A top position at a Manhattan advertising firm, a large and well-kept house in the suburbs, a beautiful blonde wife and 3 lovely children. But for Don, it's not enough. Don is routinely unfaithful to his wife, Betty, having numerous affairs with many women. And it's not that Don sleeps with these women because they are better than his wife. He does so because they are different from his wife. For Don, Betty already has the highest honor he could give a woman. She has children from him that he actively invests in. Don isn't willing to commit in this way to any other woman, except for one exception, which we will discuss momentarily, which means that all his affairs are exclusively resigned to the short-term dating strategy we discussed before. There is a striking trend in Don's affairs. All but one of them are with women that Don views beneath himself. He never for a moment imagines taking any of them seriously, and it's precisely Don's elusiveness that attracts these women. Don becomes a metaphorical Moby Dick for them, the largest prize that they can win. An exhilarating game, albeit a dangerous one. And many people view dating and relationships in this way. The chase is what pulls them in, gambling with love and heartbreak. But Don does eventually wind up on the receiving end of such treatment when he meets Rachel Mencken, an educated and classy, note my word choice here, businesswoman who owns a high-end department store. He falls under her spell. Rachel eludes Don. She doesn't submit to his will. She stands on equal footing to him, challenging him in business and confronting him emotionally. Rachel is Don's Moby Dick. To lock her down for him would be a feat that he has yet to accomplish, and it is exactly because of this burning desire he has for her that Don never gets what he wants. He confesses to Rachel that he would leave his family, his job, the life he has built, all for her, so they can run away together. But Rachel sees straight through Don. You don't want to run away with me, you just want to run away. Did Don really want to run away with Rachel and begin a family with her? Maybe. But what's more likely is that this confession wasn't made out of love for Rachel, but out of love for the chase. And to lose the chase was something he couldn't accept, so he was willing to put everything on the line. Rachel wasn't just a mistress for Don. She was a high-stakes gambling game, and Don lost. Within this paradigm exists a reoccurring conflict that has been faced by many a man for generations. Tying back into Freud, that a large number of men, when they love, they have no desire, and when they desire, they cannot love. This is at the heart of why the mistress exists, and the prevalence of it cannot be understated, but neither can the damage it has caused. Whether it's natural or not is clear. We can see men have ample reasoning behind short-term mating, but continually engaging in this causes negative consequences for the next generation. Because as we saw with jobs, if a man is in a relationship with a woman he doesn't see fit to be a mother, a woman he desires but doesn't love, then if she becomes pregnant, the child will not have a fulfilling life with active parental investment from its father. It's not only for these women that it causes problems, because if a man with this complex has a wife that he truly loves, he may feel incapable of feeling or showing desire towards her, which could leave her feeling frustrated and unwanted. It doesn't help that the modern world has exacerbated the issue for men, with pornography especially worsening the divide between a man's perception of women. There is a marked trend where men feel a parasocial resentment towards adult actresses, but then will praise other female internet personalities, because much in the same way they split women into groups of short and long-term mating. Men of all ages seldom have a problem sleeping with a woman they consider low class. It's just a matter of how much they are willing to invest into her. And more often than not, it's not very much at all. The wife and the mistress exist because of a deep-rooted biological instinct in man, but also a cultural and psychological one. The paradigm animates much of conflict in history and fiction, the categories being present from time immemorial. In Christianity, it's Virgin Mary and the Whore of Babylon. An extreme example, doubtless, but for many modern men, it manifests itself in a much more subtle way. A man might sleep with a woman, he might say he loves her, invest resources into her for years, but deep down he knows he will never marry her, never commit, precisely because she has entered into this category of the mistress, one from which few women can ever escape. It's for this reason exactly why women, and especially modern Western women, try their very best to give every indication that they are in the wife category, even at the cost of being dishonest. Many have resorted to lying about their sexual past, to feigning spirituality or religious belief, and to talking about how serious they take dating, because some are catching on to the crucial importance male perception will play on their lives. How they can either end up as a wife or as a mistress, and realizing the importance that if they ever meet a strong man, a man that can be a good father, a Moby Dick, that they can capture him, end his ravenous conquests, and seize the opportunity, the stability of being wife to a great man.